let me just say, it is so good to be here and seeing you guys. Being gone last week, we had a lot of fun in Southern California and Disneyland and all that stuff, but Sunday rolled around, and I miss this place, and I miss you on Sundays when I'm not here. This is the highlight of my week. That's either really sad or really cool. I think it's really cool, but getting to hang out with you guys and talk about Jesus is like my ideal world, and so it's fantastic. And I will say this, that we did have a great time, and Disneyland was pretty amazing. I mean, I got to see that whole Star Wars world, and they put in some incredible detail, extremely impressive, characters running around. I mean, I watched my daughter get to flirt with a stormtrooper, and it was kind of impressive, and I had mixed emotions about the whole thing. I'm like, he's going to arrest you, sweetheart. We got to knock this off. I mean, it was wild and fun. In fact, we got there, and because we knew this was going to be a popular side of Disneyland, we made a beeline straight for the Rise of the Resistance ride, which is like, I think that's the premier awesomest one that was there. And we went in there, stood in line, interacted with all these, employees in character as, resistance fighters or Imperials. I mean, it was fantastic. Got on the ride, and we're about halfway through the ride, and it broke down. And honestly, at that point, I thought it was part of the show. I'm just like, oh, this is cool. What's going to happen next? And they walked us out through the employee exit. And I'm like, oh, I think it really broke. This isn't as exciting as I thought. But it was interesting because they said hey, they apologized, which was really nice. And they gave us what they call a lightning pass to come back. So you don't have to stand in the long line again, but you can come in the short line. I thought, well, that was extremely nice of them to offer that, even though it was a kind of a big bummer. We'd really been looking forward to this. But here's what was cool. It's funny how something can happen that you're like, oh, that was unexpected, but it leads to something else that's unexpectedly good. And we came back to ride the ride, and they give you, everything's on your phone nowadays, and so they have this little code, and we're like, here's our lightning pass, because it broke down early. He's like, oh, yeah. And my wife's trying to scan it in the scanner, but her, wallet case is so fat it wouldn't fit inside the scanner. And so the guy's just like, don't even worry about it. Just go on the ride. And so we're like, okay. So we went on the ride, and it was awesome. But when we got off, we realized we still have a lightning pass. Let's go ride something else with this thing. So we hopped on. I forget which one it was. And we scanned it, and we went on the ride. And we're like, that was great. And then we looked back on her phone. And we're like, it's still there. How long does this thing last for? We're like, we don't know. So we kept using it. We used it all day long. So was Disneyland worth it? Yeah. At least once. It was hilarious and amazing. We had so much fun. And half the fun was being apologizing to people that were blazing past, sorry, we got a lightning pass. It's not our fault. But it was cool. But it was so fun because I was thinking about this. We had no expectation of that, right? We didn't have any clue. We weren't going to buy one. We knew that much because I was already complaining about how much it costs to go to Disneyland. But I love how those unexpected things come up where you're like, oh, this seems like a negative. This is a disappointment. But then all of a sudden that disappointment turns the best positive ever. You're like, this is incredible. And this is what is, I'm not kidding, you're making this up. This is what it's like when you get to learn about and start following Jesus. And that's it. Service is over. That was the sermon. Yep. I mean, that really is the nutshell. Did I just get a slam dunk from Neil? Thank you. Yes. But in all seriousness, as we get into his story again this morning in Matthew 11, it is fascinating. There's this challenge with Jesus that feels like, oh, that sounds a little hard. That sounds a little heavy. That sounds a little like, there's only one way to do this, Jesus. But as you come into this relationship following him, you realize, oh, this is the best thing. He does make your life better. And it is, I don't know how to put another word other than it is so unexpected when you start walking through and hearing what he has to say. In fact, we're going to get right into what's an interesting sort of conflict that Jesus is pointing out or specifying. And so we're going to have the words up here on the screen, but if you want to follow along in your own Bible, if that's on your phone, just turn off your notifications. But go through, look at this passage. Even there's stuff to highlight in here. Wow, this is significant pieces because there's some challenge for every heart in this room when it comes to recognizing how we tend to react to Jesus from the get-go. So here's a real quick, let's catch up with where we're at because it's been a couple of weeks since we've all been here in Matthew 11. All of this started with a question from some students, John the Baptist students. They came on behalf of their teacher, their rabbi, who's also this prophet, who's in jail. He's in prison. And he's got this question. He's starting to have doubts about Jesus. which, by the way, is a great thing. If you're here this morning and you have some doubts about God, about Jesus, just know doubts are okay. Doubts are allowed. Doubts are part of life. That's how we grow. It's how we learn. Bring the doubts, bring the questions. It's all right. They come with this question from John, the question is, are you the one? Are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ? Are you the one that I think you are? Or should we be looking for another one, the one? I mean, it's a great question. It's a question that says this: I'm a little disappointed with your performance, Jesus. I mean, there's no other way to read that. Are you really, did I get you right or not? Like, I'm wasting away in jail, and I'm like, I don't know that he was really the one. And he says, well, here's what you got to tell John. Go back and tell John everything that you've heard and seen. Right? So he tells the disciples, you guys just spend the day with me, listen to what I'm saying, watch what I'm doing, see what's happening. And then go back and report to John. And he adds this little statement at the end, and we talked about it a month ago now, but he just said, blessed is the one who is not offended on account of me. Or it's the Greek word scandalizo, isn't scandalized by me. Who's willing to come to me and figure out what I'm really about without trying to project what they want me to be, what they want God to look like, how they think life's supposed to work. But they're willing to let Jesus fill in those gaps, those blanks. And that's a great picture. And then he leads in this whole conversation about how great John is and how awesome he is, but then there's this new upside-down kingdom. When God's kingdom showed up, even the least person, the kingdom is greater. And we've walked through those things in the weeks before. But it gets to this next piece, and look at this. This is so interesting. Jesus is now looking or talking to these crowds of people who have been watching him do all the same things that John's disciples saw. They're watching him heal blind people. They're watching him heal deaf people. Right? They're watching him heal people who can't walk or are limping. Right? He's watching people, he's raising the dead on occasion. I mean, all things that are like mind-blowing. I like that when you guys fill in my sentences for me. That's good. You're mind-blowing, right? I mean, it's like if somebody walked into here and started doing that stuff, we would all be like, what? Like, best day at church ever. Like, that's crazy. That's awesome. It's amazing. This is what is right in front of them. And then Jesus comes to this place in Matthew 11, verse 16. Look at what he says. He says, to what can I compare this generation? It's like children playing a game in the public square. They complain to their friends. We played wedding songs, and you didn't dance. So we played funeral songs, and you didn't mourn. This generation, right? By this generation, he means everybody. The kids, but the parents, the grandparents, like all the layers, everybody that's there, everyone who's watching him, seeing what he can do, right? Hearing it and seeing all firsthand, first-person encounter with Jesus. I mean, how incredible is that? And he's saying, and yet you guys, you remind me of children who just can't quite decide on what game they want to play. How many of you guys remember the incredible gift to our children that is called summer vacation? Possibly the greatest invention of all time, and all the teachers seem to think it's pretty cool too. But do you remember, I remember getting to the month of July sometime on summer vacation, and you've been hanging out with your friends for 3 or 4 weeks now, and you've been swimming, and you've been riding your bikes, you've been playing board games and video games and watching movies and, doing whatever else, and you hit July, and you start to look at you like, what do you want to do? And you're like, I don't know. You want to go swimming? Nah, we did that yesterday. You want to go ride our bike? No, I already did that. You want to play it? No, kind of bored of that one. Jesus is like, that's how you guys are acting towards me. You're like children who are like, now bring us something new. What if we play great music and we all get up and dance? It's a wedding. They're like, yeah, we don't really feel like dancing. All right, well, what if we play really sad songs and we can all cry together? That doesn't sound good either. No, not what we want to do, Jesus. And he compares it to how they're responding to him and John the Baptist. He says, for John didn't spend his time eating and drinking, and you say he's possessed by a demon. And just focus on this for a second, because this is kind of comical to me. John is a rough, rugged, fascinating dude. But, you talk about a guy who makes an appearance, and you remember him showing up. He shows up, he wears all leather, like camel leather. Whatever the heck that looks like. I have no idea, but he wears camel leather. He's never cut his hair in his entire life. He can't. It's a whole religious vow thing he took. So he's got some giant dreadlocks wrapped around his body, and he only eats locusts and wild honey. Locusts, by the way, are big grasshoppers. So when he says he doesn't come eating and drinking, he means you don't go over to John's house for dinner. And if you invite him over, he's like, are you having locusts and honey? It's like my favorite. I mean, do you eat those together? Is it like you dip the locusts and the honey? Then probably a great source of protein is my guess. Reminds me of a story about my wife frying up a grasshopper. I'll tell that another time. But this is John, and John he's this guy who's kind of like, he's rough like the wilderness, because that's where he's from. And he preaches these sort of fiery sermons. He preaches what we think of as like hellfire and brimstone. He preaches like God is coming, and if you don't repent, he's chopping your tree down, and you're the tree. I mean, he's calling people names. And he's like, you guys, get out of the world. Get over here. Start getting it right. Follow God. Let me baptize you. And he is popular. Don't get me wrong. People are coming out. Thousands and thousands of people are coming to John out in the middle of the wilderness. So it's not that he isn't popular, but he's not being followed by most of the people. And then he says this, the Son of Man, and that's a title Jesus takes for himself. It says, the Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. But wisdom is shown to be right by its results. I think this is why we as Americans like Jesus. Because he looks like a glutton. Right? I mean, church got better when we brought in donuts. Right? I mean, come on. What's the least nutritious thing we could possibly give everybody early in the morning? I mean, there might be worse, but it's right up there. But somehow, it's the most socially acceptable dessert to eat for breakfast. And we're all like, of course, donuts. I mean, we're not like cake and ice cream. We're like, that's ridiculous. Donuts are magically okay. But Jesus comes, and people are like, Jesus, come to my house and eat and drink. And he's like, absolutely. Have some more wine. Jesus said, absolutely. He's there hanging out with the gluttons and the drunkards. And we're like, kind of like that guy. He's good people. You can have him over. You can have a good conversation, right? You can eat together, enjoy together, laugh together, right? He's coming, and he's not particularly picky or choosy about who he does this with. That's why they're like, he eats with tax collectors, IRS agents, the lowest of the low. All right, which she's not talking about IRS agents. Their day, tax collectors they're almost like thugs. I mean, these were corrupt individuals who were making a killing, legally in many ways, but a killing nonetheless at the expense of others. They hated them. They were like the worst of people. They felt an emotional reaction to anybody spending time with tax collectors. It's a little bit like we said, Jesus spent time with child predators. We'd be like, oh, that's not okay. That's how they felt. That's not okay. Or even those other sinners, whatever that might be. But they're like, Jesus, you're a little too happy to be with all the sinful people. John's like, turn or burn, baby. And Jesus is like, let's have dinner. Right? You got two options. Interestingly enough, Jesus is saying both of us came from God. Right? You get two different, you get the same message, same God, and yet you get these two different ways in which it's being delivered by two very distinctive and different people. Right? It's pretty fascinating. And here's his simple point. God's sending you two different messengers, but you've rejected them both. You didn't really like or want either of them. And this is fascinating because sometimes we have this idea, or there's people around us, our friends or our family, who maybe we've talked to about God or about church even, and they're like, I don't know if I really believe that. I've got all these doubts. If I ever saw God do something, if I ever saw a miracle, if God ever revealed or showed himself like to my eyes, then I would believe, then it would be easy, then it would be okay. And here's what's interesting. These guys all are seeing it. They're right there. It's in their face. It's visual, and yet they're rejecting him. They're not willing to follow because it's not the way they want it. It's a little bit like if you were going to get your kids all excited about going to In-N-Out Burger to get milkshakes because they just want a Neapolitan milkshake. Some chocolate, some vanilla, some strawberry. We're feeling interactive today. I like it. It makes me come out here. Right? We want to go to In-N-Out Burger, but what happens if you're all excited for that and you get there and they're like, oh, we're out of strawberry? You're like, well, then I'm not getting anything. But don't you like chocolate and vanilla? Yeah, that's why I wanted Neapolitan. Well, great. We'll give you a chocolate vanilla mix. You're like, no strawberry. Forget it. Not having anything. I'm going to go pout in the parking lot. I mean, probably get a double-double still, but you know what I mean? Like, Jesus is like, what do you want from God? Look at all that he's doing for you to see and to believe and to know. And it's like no, it's not our music. It's not the tune we wanted to hear. We want some third option. He's like, man, there isn't a third option. And this is where it gets this really kind of interesting and challenging. He says that Jesus then began to denounce the towns where he had done so many of his miracles because they hadn't repented of their sins and turned to God. Like, that's what he's doing it all for. And so that people will go like, wow, God is among us. Wow, God is speaking to us. Wow, here's his truth. Here's his grace. Here's his mercy come to us. Right into our laps, right into our lives, right into our town, right into our streets. I mean, it's right here for us to take and to have. And he's saying, in that moment, you should have repented. You should have responded by saying, you know what? I see what God is doing. I'm hearing this message. You know what I'm recognizing? There's some stuff in my life that's been wrong. I'm recognizing that I haven't been doing it right. I'm recognizing that, man, what I really want is I really want to turn my life toward God. I want to turn it towards him. I want to follow him. I want to go after him. But here's the challenge. It's not just them. This is us. This is our world. This is my heart. This is usually your heart and your family's heart and your neighbor's heart and your friend's heart. There's this sense inside of us that says, like, I still really want control over my life. I still really want to be able to define the right and the wrong and what I'm going to do with my life. And neither Jesus nor John gives us that option. They say, God is inviting you into his way. We're going to read a section next, and I think it's so important to understand that what Jesus is about to be saying, it isn't that he's trying to be condemning, that it's going to sound that way. What he's really expressing is his disappointment. You know, you remember when your parents used to look at you after you did something you got caught doing, and they're like, I'm just really disappointed with you right now. And sometimes that was actually way more powerful than other consequences. That you're just like, oh. There's a tone in which Jesus is about to speak to these people who have seen all that he's done in front of them, and they've refused it. They've refused to believe in him. And you know, we talk about faith a lot and belief a lot, and it's one of those words where it always needs a little help because it gets used so often. But you know, we talk about how you can have, right now, are demonstrating great faith in those chairs that you're sitting in. You're putting the full weight of your body, your life, your health in the hands of cafeteria chairs. But they seem pretty stable. Everybody else is in them. They're staying up. That's pretty good. But you know, it's a little different when you think about a person. It's different than when you say, like, you know, I put my faith in Rich. I believe in Rich. Don't laugh. I do. I believe in Rich. But you know, when I believe in someone, it's interesting because they can make decisions, unlike this chair, doesn't get a lot of choice in the matter. I put my faith in the future that they're going to continue to do or act in a way that I can trust. That they're predictable, they're reliable. We might use the word they're faithful. They're trustworthy. And it's interesting because Jesus is asking for us to put our trust in him. And sometimes we can feel like in a moment we can do that. And sometimes when we think about the future is where that gets hard. Like, what is that going to require of me in this, the unknown, the scariness of the future? What might that look like? What might that be like? But Jesus is here in this moment talking to these towns and these villages and these people. And in the moment he's saying, right here, right now, you're choosing to not believe or trust in me. Instead, you're choosing to be offended by all these other people that I'm hanging out with, these other sinful people that you're like, this isn't okay. And so here's what he says. He says, what sorrow awaits you, Chorazin and Bethsaida? For the miracles I did in you had been done in wicked Tyre and Sidon. Their people would have repented of their sins long ago, clothing themselves in burlap and throwing ashes on their heads to show their remorse. And he's referencing specifically Chorazin and Bethsaida are two little villages that he spent a lot of time in doing a lot of these miracles in. They're Jewish people. They're his people, but he's comparing them to some of the cities that are the opposite nations, enemies of theirs, ancient ones, and not believers, and they're full of violence and injustice and all kinds of things that they're like, no, that's not good. And he's making this comparison, and it's meant to be kind of a punch to the gut, honestly, of people living in these towns. And he says, I tell you, Tyre and Sidon will be better off in judgment day than you. And you people of Capernaum, will you be honored in heaven? No, you will go down to the place of the dead. For if the miracles I did for you have been done in wicked Sodom, it would still be here today. I tell you, even Sodom will be better off on judgment day than you. And Jesus is kind of picking like the places that are like the all-time worst as far as they're concerned. And saying, but by comparison to what you are saying no to right now, meaning me, the opportunity that's right in front of you, the evidence that's being given to you, the way in which God has come down to step right into your life and rejecting it, you're going to make yourselves worse off. And it's wild because Capernaum is like Jesus' headquarters. All the gospel stories where he picks up Peter, Andrew, James, John, even Matthew, they're all from Capernaum. Like it's their town, their hometown. It's their family. It's their friends. It's their, people they worked with, right? It's their world, and yet some are obviously following, but many are like, they're not willing to believe. And it's not that they're doubting. They're not willing to believe. Because we all wrestle with doubts. In fact, on Easter, we looked at how even the disciples doubted on Easter. Doubt's fine. We can work through doubt if we keep coming towards Jesus. It's choosing to not believe because we're offended by something about him. And we're just flat out saying no. But you know what's interesting? Why did they really reject him? How did they react and respond to him? What was their reaction that Jesus is so concerned with? Because this is really interesting to me. Right? Because they're watching these miracles. I mean, how would they react to it? I'm going to give you a couple examples. If we go backwards in Matthew 9:33, it says this, the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. Doesn't sound terrible, does it? Doesn't sound like they're missing too much. Right? They're kind of like, this is awesome. We've never even seen or heard of anything like this happening. Here's another one, a little bit further back in Matthew 9. Fear swept through the crowd as they saw this happen, and they praised God for giving humans such authority. They're even recognizing that God is in the midst of this, that God is working through this. This has got to be the power of God. It's godly miracles. These are the people that Jesus is talking to when he makes the statement, and it's that they like Jesus. They even are willing to celebrate Jesus. There's some respect for Jesus. And that is not enough, according to Jesus. He doesn't want people to just like him. He doesn't even want people just to celebrate him or even to respect him. There's something more that he came and he wants from us. There's a reaction, a response that's appropriate. And if we look at where all of this started, you remember way back in Matthew 9, at the very end, it said that he's looking at these crowds and his heart goes out. He has compassion for them. He's hurting for them. And he sees them as like they're sheep without a shepherd. He sees them as being harassed and helpless. Like there's no one to step in and lead them, to show them how to make sense out of their lives, how to make it better, where they're supposed to go, to help them identify what's wrong, to figure it out, to make sense of it all. And he's come to be that. And the problem is that's what they're rejecting. He's come to invite or to call people to follow him, to make him the leader of their life, to decide and learn what does it look like to lean into this life that God is really offering me. That's different than the life I've had up to this point. It's different than the life that I've gotten from my culture, my family, or my religion and its background. It's more than any of those things. And Jesus is putting this in front of them. And you know what? They like him. I'm sure the invitation is to come to our house, keep healing people. We're okay with that. Do another one. This is extremely entertaining, if nothing else. I mean, I would drive across town to see Jesus do miracles. Right? We all would. But Jesus' question would be like, now come follow me. And it's kind of an exciting thing because Jesus has this much bigger view that he wants something more for us. Here's a couple ways he put it. He says, I have come that you might have life and life to the fullest. When he looks at those people, he's like, you guys, there's a part of life that's missing. And there's a part of you that knows something's missing. Something inside is missing. It's not the circumstantial. It's not the stuff around you. It's not your family or your friends. It's not political. It's not economic. It's not the culture. It's something inside. Is like no matter how good things get, there's still a sense of like, is this all life has to offer? There's something missing. And that missing is that relationship with God. In fact, here's what's so interesting. He phrases it this way. He says, to Nicodemus, he says, you must be born again. If you're going to step into the kingdom of God, if you're going to receive it, you have to be born again. And that phrase has taken on a kind of a whole new meaning in our culture. But what he means is this: you have to become like an infant. You know what's cool about infants? They're like blank slates. They're ready to learn. They're those sponges. They're like, we want to absorb. We want to grow. We want to develop. We want to be taught. We want to figure out this life. And Jesus is saying, you've got to become like that. You've got to want to know this new life that I'm offering. You've got to want to learn, how do I walk Jesus' way? How do I think Jesus' way? How do I love Jesus' way? What does self-control look like Jesus' way? What does worship look like? What does my job look like? It's me. Who am I really as Jesus has made me and created me? That's what he's coming to offer. That's what he's put on the table. And look at what Jesus does. It says this. At that time, Jesus prayed this prayer. And I would love to be a fly on the wall, honestly. One of the people in the crowd. And here's Jesus saying, like, woe is all of you. And then all of a sudden, he just busts into prayer. Like, that's his sermon. Woe to you guys. All right, let's pray. That's a different sermon. I don't think I have the courage for that kind of sermon. At that time, he prayed, "O Father, Lord of heaven and earth." Like, God, you're our Father to us humans, but you're the creator, the maker, the Lord of it all. Thank you for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased you to do this, to do it this way. Isn't that a weird prayer? He's like, God, thank you for hiding this. Fun fact for you, that word hide or hidden is the word Greek crypto. Who knew you knew so much Greek, right? A little cryptocurrency, a little crypto theology going on right here, right? This is so fascinating, but he's praying, God, thank you, this is your way. And I often wonder, like, is God intentionally hiding something, or is he simply saying, it's just really hard for people from a certain standpoint to see it? It's kind of like if I hide something underneath a really low table, Paul Nelson's never going to see it. He's like 6'4" or something ridiculous. He's tall Paul. It's really hard to get down. You're like, it's down. They're like, it's not worth it. You know, it can't be that good. Right? When you're tall, it's like way low, is it hidden? Well, no, it's a lot of work. But who's this one a lot of work for? It's a lot of work for the wise, for the clever. Now, quick show of hands, how many of you guys are clever? See, there's some of you are being honest. If we had time to think about it in a real discussion, we'd all be raising our hands. Because there's a part of all of us that's like, I can get out of stuff like a champ. Because I'm clever. I may not use that word, but that's what it means when I can get out of stuff. Right? I mean, talk my way out of something, act my way out of something. Like, we've learned life. That's wisdom, is the practicality of, I know how to get through stuff, around stuff, make choices, move forward, accomplish what I want, get the things that I want. That's what wisdom and clever is all about right here. And he's talking to people that he's saying, like, you guys, you have your own wisdom and you have your own cleverness. And guess what? It's working for you. Not that it's broken. It's working. It's working as well as it can. Working as well as you're used to. It's working for you in a sense. But his emphasis is this: the childlike ones. They're the ones that accept that they don't know how to do life yet. They don't have all the answers. They're not competent yet. They're the ones that have to learn because the basics of life are still in front of them and challenging. And I don't know if you have kids or have had kids or even ever want to have kids, but maybe you even remember how hard it was to learn to count to 100. I'm laughing because I've got nieces that are learning it right now. And she's an awesome counter as long as you help her with every 10. She can get to 19, and then like, what's that? 20. Oh, she can get to 29. What's that? 30. She can get to 39, right? She's got that part down, and I remember that same thing. I remember my dad looking at me going like, it's just like counting to 10. What is the problem? I'm like, I don't get it. It's really hard when you don't get it. But kids are like, I got to learn this. Kids are like, he's saying, the humble, the ones who are just willing to learn is all Jesus is talking about. And it's interesting, right? He's saying, like, here's the children in this case are the children who are saying, okay, Jesus, we're willing to learn, relearn if we have to. We're willing to start over if we have to. We're willing to come back to scratch. If you've got a better life for us, if you're going to help us understand what it is to be connected to God, the author of life, I want to hear that. I want to know that. I want that kind of life. But if you're just content in your own wisdom, And that's really hard, right? Because it's your wisdom that gets in the way of trusting Jesus. I mean, think of it this way. When you feel competent in your day, like you're going to work maybe, right? Or you're raising your kids and you know your schedule, right? And whatever it might be, you're going to school and you're like, I can ace this class. And you're feeling competent. You're studied up. You are prepared. You've been doing your job. You're an expert in your field, right? You can go to work and feel like, I've got this. Just say that with me. I've got this, right? We can feel so independent. We can feel so confident when we've got it. But when we feel that way, what's the last thing that we typically think of is, I really need God's help. I mean, honestly, the least and worst day of my week, almost every single week, because I'm a moron, is Monday, because it's my day off. And I think to myself, am I going to really need Jesus' help today? I mean, it's laundry. It's some dishes maybe. Possibly some yard work. This doesn't sound that hard. I mean, I feel like I can do this stuff. And I'm a moron because I failed to realize it has nothing to do with the tasks of my life. It has everything to do with my walk with Him. Do I want to go and do laundry knowing I'm connected to my Heavenly Father who loves me, or do I want to do it as an individual and independent person who can handle this task all by his big boy self? And it's amazing the foolish pattern that gets into my life that says, well, I'm just going to get busy, I just want to get started, and I don't take the time that I do every other day because being a pastor is frankly terrifying sometimes. I'm like, I know I need Jesus' help all the time because I never know what kind of crazy nonsense you guys are going to do and call me about and be like, and if anybody calls and starts with Pastor Cory, I'm like, oh, crap, we're in trouble. They started with Pastor. It's not like, hey, Cory. It's like, oh, crud. I mean, usually it means like, who am I going to delegate this to? Because I need an expert. I already know it's not going to be me. Nobody calls with theology questions, by the way, starting with Pastor Cory. That's why I know it's not going to be up my alley. But as long as we trust in our own wisdom, we miss this boat. That's what's happening. It's not that they don't believe Jesus can do miracles. It's not that they don't believe that He's from God. What they believe is like, I don't really need everything else He's offering. Not enough to lower myself to hang out with a guy that's hanging out with people that are lower than myself. Did you catch that math? I don't want to be guilty by association with all these bad characters that Jesus is hanging out with. But Jesus is going, I got bad news. You are the bad characters. You're all in a great big lump sum that I came to die and save. I mean, that's the incredible piece of this. And here's the challenge, I think, maybe in a nutshell. I was listening to Timothy Keller, one of my favorite pastors and preachers, who was sharing the story about how he was explaining again, man, it's all this incredible gift that God has given us through Jesus. That's what He's offering. It's this gift. It's simply by faith. If we accept what He's doing, He has come to do for us, He's ushering us into this new relationship with God. All of our sin gets put behind us. All of it gets dealt with and taken care of, and we get this whole new life that is a changing life, that life we get to live in this amazing gratitude. And he was telling the story about meeting this lady who came to his church, and she said, I grew up in church, I go to church, I've been a part of a different church my whole life. I've never heard Jesus explained like this. I've never heard the gospel explained like this, where it's just this incredible gift of God. And she said, why doesn't every church tell this story? To which, because Keller's a wise guy, is like, well, I don't think I can answer for every church. I don't think I can tell you that. Like, I can't explain why everybody else does what they do. But you tell me, in your experience, why don't you think that the church you were in would do that? Why would they settle for a religion that is, we're all here to do our best. We're all here to be just the best people we can be. Why would they settle for that religion over it is by God's incredible grace? And she gave a really insightful answer. She said, I think, honestly, it's because when I am in the world of just doing the best that I can, I may not have total confidence that when I die, I'm going to go to heaven or that I'm on a good standing with God, but I know that as long as I'm doing my best, I have this sense of my rights. I have this sense that God's sort of obligated to me because I'm trying, I'm participating, I'm doing some stuff that He wants me to do. It's kind of like when you get pulled over by the police and you're like, I'm a taxpayer. Right? Come on, there's a few of you in here. Like, I pay your salary. He said, we do that with God. We're like, God, where you been? Come on, you're about to show up. You got to do this. What, you're going to tell me I'm doing something wrong? I'm a taxpayer. I pray on sometimes. I read my Bible sometimes. I even put some money in the offering plate sometimes. Like, God, you owe me, not the other way around. And there's a sense of which we can like this religion of like, well, I did my best. I did good stuff. I'm trying. And I have this sense of like, God's got to do his part now. But, this is her response. She said, but if it's all a gift from God, and that gift is his son dying on a cross for my sin, and it's free. That's terrifying. It means God doesn't owe me anything, and it means he can ask anything from me. What am I going to say? No. He sacrificed his son. And at the deepest part of our heart, that's the fear that says, I don't want to lose the control of my own life. Even if I can see this example of God's incredible love for me. That's the struggle where we have to become like children and say, you know what, the future is undefined, and the only person that's got any control over it is God himself. And a God who loves like this is worth following. He's worth knowing. He's worth trusting in. He's worth coming and bringing the fullness of my heart and myself and saying, I'm yours. Who do you want me to be? Who have you made me to be? And I'm just going to end with this statement from a guy in history named St. Irenaeus, and I love this. I read this recently in a book, and he said this. He said, the glory of God is man fully alive. The glory of God is man fully alive. And I love this statement because as I think about Jesus and what he came to do and what he's talking about right here is, this is the thing that sometimes we forget about God. That God is not just invested in us in terms of Jesus, but that Jesus is here to restore us to what God originally intended us to be. And whatever we might think that God wants from us, that what God wants ultimately is you to become the fullest and most alive version of yourself. And the only way that's possible is to be in relationship with the God who gave you life to start with. And that's what God is invested in. That's what he keeps investing himself in. That's why he brings us truth. That's why he brings us sometimes discipline. That's why he brings us this reckless love. That's why he brings us his very spirit to live inside of us. It's what he wants us to be. So the question today is simply this. And we have to go deep into our hearts and examine ourselves. Is what am I really living in? What kind of faith am I living in? What does my trust in Jesus really look like? And deep inside, am I still kind of playing the like, well, I'm going to keep trying and doing my best, God? Or am I at the place where I recognize, God, you have done everything for me through Jesus? And I am just grateful. I'm just thankful. I'm just in awe of your peace, the way you've removed my guilt, my shame, my resentments. I just want to know you. I just want to follow you. I just want to discover what it would look like for me to be fully alive living in you. Let's just bow our heads for a moment. I encourage you just to talk to your Father in heaven. Talk to him about your heart. Talk to him about surrendering that depth of who you are to him. Talk and just ask him to come inside and to reveal himself and to give you his peace, his love, his joy, his presence. And if you've never done any of that before, I'm going to pray a prayer out loud, and I'm going to invite you to pray it silently yourself. If you want to just start and need some words, pray something like this. Heavenly Father, I hear the words of your Son today. And I want a life fully alive in you. I want to accept this gift of your Son's sacrifice, his payment for my sin. I want to be forgiven. I want to be free. And I want to love you. And I pray this in the name of Jesus.